Hey, what's up, gentlemen? Welcome to the Dad Edge podcast. I'm Larry Hagner, your host and founder of this podcast, this show, and this movement. Hey, listen, this is not only going to be, this episode is not only going to be available on all the podcasting channels, but also head on over to the Dad Edge YouTube channel, because what I'm going to be doing here today is I'm going to be sharing with you guys how to have deeper conversations, how to have conversational excellence with your spouse, with your partner. So whatever we're calling her these days. I think the correct term these days is partner, but spouse, wife, partner, whatever we're calling her these days. We're about 7 days right now from Valentine's Day. And obviously, this is a big month. This is a big month for love, for connection, and all these things. This is also a huge month for couples out there who want to celebrate some of the connections that they've made with each other, some of the good things that they're doing. But it's also a month for those of us who don't have the marriage that we truly want. It's a reminder of like, man, like I really want to be more connected to my wife. So before I move on today, I have one request and I have a couple of quick announcements here. My number one request is this: head on over to iTunes, head on over to Spotify, wherever you download your podcast, or just this YouTube video alone. Leave a comment here or hit the like button, subscribe, or share it in some way, shape, or form. If you're on Spotify or iTunes, go take 30 seconds. If I've helped you in any way, shape, or form, leave me a 5-star rating and review, but don't do it yet. Wait until I give you the value first, because today's episode is going to be chalked with 3 different ways that you can actually elevate the connection with your wife, just by making some of the simplest tweaks possible. I think you'll actually be really, really surprised. Some of these things are going to serve as really powerful reminders. And as we get older and as we just are married longer, we tend to forget these things. We're not doing them nearly as intentionally as we did when we were dating or before we got married. So that's my one request. If I've helped you out in any way out of the past almost 1,200 episodes, go over to iTunes, go over to Spotify, leave me a rating or review, or subscribe here to our YouTube channel. Another announcement here. So what I'm going to be showing you guys today is some content and basically a small preview of what we do in the Dad Edge Alliance and how we actually teach our men. So if you're watching me on YouTube, you're actually going to see the workbooks, the PDFs, the documents that we actually use to help our men get really dialed in, to teach them the tactical skills. This is a tactical skill teaching training as well. It's going to facilitate incredible conversations between you and your wife. It's going to create more curiosity, more depth, more appreciation. You're going to feel like you're dating again. I know that sounds, for some of you guys, too good to be true, but trust me when I say you are going to be able to learn things today that you're going to be able to implement, and they're very, very simple, that are going to help you with the connection with your wife. None of us got married to have a mediocre marriage. None of us did. We got married because we wanted to have an incredible marriage. We got married because we loved her. We got married because we wanted to elevate the relationship further along than before we got married. And somehow, some way, the challenges that come about with marriage, they just get tough for some reason. Actually, I know the reasons, and I think you do too. Anything that we do well in life, anything at all, we learn the skills that are associated with that particular skill. So, like, for instance, if you're a civil engineer, you don't just wake up one day and say, hey, I want to be a civil engineer today. And then suddenly you are, and you're doing the job flawlessly. You don't go into a MMA fight and never take any type of self-defense training or any type of training whatsoever. You're like, hey, today I'm going to be an MMA fighter. I've never done martial arts before, but I'm going to do it. And I think I can figure it out. I've seen enough UFC fights. I think I know what to do. We would just get pummeled, right? And for some crazy reason, we don't do that in our careers. We don't do that in martial arts. We don't do that in sports. We have a coach, we have a team within sports, but we do that in other areas of our life. And one of them is marriage, right? And this month in February, it's a powerful reminder of it. It just kind of nudges us a little bit. Like, do you have a great marriage with your wife, or is it really, really tough? And I know if you're in a season of challenge, I know how that feels. I spent the first half of my marriage, first 10 years of my marriage, frustrated. I am shocked that my wife and I are still married today, that Jessica and I are still married to this day. Things started to change when I started learning new things, like learning new skills within communication and connection and conversational excellence and intimacy and all these things. I had no idea you could actually learn these things. I always assumed like, well, we're married, it should come naturally. And it doesn't come naturally. In fact, the longer you're together and the more you buy into that lie of, well, this should come naturally with no work. And if it's work, then maybe we just don't love each other anymore. Man, don't buy into that because it is work, but it's good work and it's wholesome work and it's work that is worth it, right? What happens over time is the relationship starts to deteriorate. We start to drift. We start to have distance. And when we start to have distance, what happens is we create this division between us. And that division is called emotional resentment. Usually what that looks like is he's not doing this, this, and this. He's doing this, this, and that. And I don't like it. Or he's not doing this. And I don't appreciate that. Shouldn't he know what to do? And on our side, it'd be like, well, I'm doing this, this, and this. Shouldn't she be appreciating me more or respecting me more or whatever else, or she shouldn't really talk to me that way. But all of these things get really, really mixed up when each party is not getting their three needs met. And those three needs within relationships are for men is to be respected, to be appreciated, and to be validated. Those are our three needs. If you really want to kick a man in the emotional balls, disrespect him and don't appreciate him. In fact, do the opposite. And if you really want to add salt to the wound, you do it in publicly. So disrespect him publicly, unappreciate him publicly, and that is like that's a deal breaker for a lot of us. I have a client, a one-on-one client, who has a 2-year-old daughter, and I'm helping him right now with his marriage. And one of the things that he said that his wife used to do is he used to, like, before the wife would hand the daughter over to the dad, he'd be like, hey, daddy is very mean. Daddy says very mean things to mommy, and I know you think he's great, but daddy can be very mean. Like, whether we're mean or not, that's a point, right? But we never disrespect each other in that way. We never leverage our kids for disrespect, like publicly like that. So it's really cruel. And that is going to create a huge division in our relationship. Now, the three basic needs of our wives, and quite frankly, some of us men are good at it, and some of us we have opportunities to grow. And I'll tell you, I was an idiot, an absolute idiot when it came to this, my first half of my marriage. And even I would say the next 5 years, I've only really gotten my handle on this over the past 5 years. And what I can tell you is the last 5 years of my relationship with Jess has by far been the best. It's not been all sunshine and rainbows. I'm not gonna, say it's been amazing every single day, every single minute. Of course, we go through challenges, but those challenges are much more short-lived. They're much easier to get through when you have the skills to navigate it. But if you're just trying to wing it, and if you're just focusing on like, we used to be like this before kids, and it used to be so much easier, and why can't we get back to that? We can't get back to that necessarily. And I'll explain here in a second. We can't get back to that necessarily because that's not us anymore. That's not the dynamics that are at play anymore. So, like, for instance, if you want to get back to the relationship you had before kids when you were dating, we can get to that somehow, but there's going to be other complexities because we're parents now. Most of us have even more than one kid, which is going to add even more busyness and more moving parts. Like, listen, I've got 4 boys. I've got a 16-year-old. I've got a 17-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of sports. There's a lot of basketball games. There's a lot of moving parts. There's behaviors. There's activities that we're doing. There's so many different things that are at play here versus then when Jessica and I were dating, when we first got married in the first 3 years of our marriage, we didn't have kids, right? So it's impossible to think like, how can we go back to our relationship before kids? Now, we can actually reinvent some of those things, right? We can actually get more connected. Believe it or not, you can actually be closer now with kids than you ever were when you were dating. You can actually have a better, deeper, more connected relationship with more intimacy, with more love, with more respect, with more appreciation, with more sex than you did when you were dating. And I'll tell you, I'm living proof of that. We are more connected. Jessica and I are. We have better sex. We have more sex. We have better conversations, but it's because we intentionally dial in some of the skills that I'm going to be teaching you guys today. So what I'm going to share with you guys today, and if you're watching me on YouTube, these are the skills that we teach our men in the Alliance. And in the Alliance, and in the month of February, we are helping men elevate their marriage. It's all about conversational excellence. It's all about creating more intimacy, more depth. It's all about creating more sex in our relationship, more and better sex. But we do these things and we get these things dialed in actually outside the bedroom, believe it or not. If we're doing the right things outside the bedroom, what happens inside the bedroom, and number one, is going to be a natural result, right? Because if we're doing the right things and she's doing the right things, we're doing the right things as a couple, we're doing the work, that is going to result in we're going to be closer. We're going to be more connected. We're going to have more of those feelings of intimacy. And as a result, we are going to have more and better sex. It's just going to happen. It's the result of what happens. What usually happens for us as married couples is we try the physical thing first, and hopefully all the other things, fall like a domino. It's actually the opposite. We need to have all the other things dialed in first. So in the month of February, we're helping men, and it's not too late. You can actually jump right in still learn 3 more weeks of amazing skills to elevate your relationship. Plus, in the alliance, not only are we dedicating the entire community and the entire teaching to marriage, conversational excellence, intimacy, closeness, sex, passion, all of these things, but we also have 4 marriage calls per week in the alliance. So it doesn't matter what tactics we're teaching our men in the alliance. We have 4 call teams that are dedicated just to this, no matter what we're teaching. So you can double down on your marriage at any time if you're a part of our community. So I'm going to give you guys what you came here for, and I'm going to be doing some screen sharing. So like I said, head on over to YouTube, subscribe, check out this video. It will be a link there for you. But this training will be absolute gold for you guys moving forward in the month of February. So here's what we're doing. This is what our alliance workbooks look like, and this is the month of February. So in the very first week here, we are doing conversational excellence, right? This is week 1. In order to elevate the connection in our marriages, it starts actually with the conversations, not necessarily only the words that we say, but also how we listen, how we reflect back, how we demonstrate empathy, right? All of these things matter, and they matter so much. We can try to get close, we can try to create connection, but if we're not doing these things within conversation, quite frankly, it's all for nothing. So here's what we're going to do. I like to start out every single thing that we teach in the Alliance with a quote, because it just gets us primed for what it is we're about ready to go learn. So Stephen Covey stated, most people don't listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. And how many of us are guilty of that, where we actually shut down our listening ears, we shut down actually even our heart, because we just want to reply to what she is saying, right? She does it too, right? These are skills. And this is actually one of the 7 habits of highly effective people: is seek first to understand and then to be understood. Well, if you want to elevate intimacy and you want to elevate connection, you have to seek first to understand, right? Not be thinking of necessarily what to say, but really understanding what she is saying. So the 3 learning objectives that we're going to go over today is how to give your full attention and minimize distractions. Now, this might seem super simple, but it's something we get tripped up all the time. How many of you have been in conversations with your wife where you or her have your cell phone in your hand? I'm not even talking about looking at it, but actually have it in your hand. Now, the psychological impact of just having your cell phone in your hand, Simon Sinek said this. Basically, what I am telling you in a nonverbal communicative way is that you are not nearly as important as my device, and you don't have my full attention, whether that thing is closed or not. If it's in my hand, it sends a message to her that there's something between us, and her too. Putting the phones down, having open nonverbal communication, body language, having open body language, saying like, I am in this conversation with you. I'm not worried about my cell phone. I'm in it with you. I have eye contact, the whole 9 yards. So that's number 1. How to demonstrate empathy. Some of us are good at this, but most of the world does not understand this. Empathy is all about helping us understand, what is she feeling? What am I feeling? Right. And also being a good reflective listener, right? Being able to articulate back what it is that what you understand with what she said, and vice versa. That's empathy. But also understanding what emotion is tied to what we're feeling. Is she feeling frustrated? Is she feeling overwhelmed? Is she feeling exhausted, sad, depressed, irritated? All of these things that are so important. Now, when it comes to better conversations, what's really meaningful and important is utilizing open-ended questions, right, for more depth in the conversation. Now, I'll tell you, This is another one. Now, most people are like, well, I ask her how her day is. We don't want to ask how her day was. That is like the number one question that really doesn't create any type of connection whatsoever, because she's going to answer it with fine, good, crazy, busy, boring. Because guess what? We do the exact same thing. So I'm going to give you guys here a list of different questions. I'm going to screen share it. Feel free to take a snapshot of it if you're watching it on YouTube. I'll hold it up here for quite some time. You can screenshot it. You can also head on over to thedadedge.com/25 questions. You can download a PDF, and I also teach you the skill of actually using open-ended, what we call generative questions. Take a sip of my coffee there. All right. So here are some of the common mistakes that happen when we go to connect with our wives, okay, through conversation. Now, the reason I'm sharing with you what the common mistakes are is because I'm going to show you what good looks like. But if I don't show you what not so good looks like, then I'm not showing you where the potential bear traps are, right? Or where the potholes are at. Part of my job here is to not only share with you what to do, but also what to stay away from. Because if we don't know those things, we might continue to make the same mistakes. So number one is interrupting or finishing her sentences. So the solution here is to practice patience and allow for silence, even though sometimes silence can be awkward, but just allow for silence. Resist the urge to interrupt. Let her finish her thoughts before responding. Embrace the moments of silence as it gives her space to express them fully. So it's really okay to just be there, right? And to just listen, right? It does so much good when we listen. Now, the other one too, and this goes along with what Stephen Covey says, we're preparing a response while we listen. We don't want to do that. I know it's so hard because we as men, what we want to do is we want to problem solve. We want to be better. But what I'll tell you is it goes so much further if we just simply listen. So we want to focus on understanding, not so much the response, but understanding. That's super important right before responding. The other thing too is, and we've already talked about this, we beat it to death, I think, at this point, which is allowing distractions to interfere. And you want to minimize distractions and be fully present. I'll share with you this. My wife and I were trying to have a conversation last night while we were watching the Kansas City Chiefs play in the playoffs game when they were playing the Bills, which, by the way, was I'm a Chiefs fan, but it was gut wrenching, man, to see Bass kick that field goal wide. Like the pain in that poor guy's face. Oh my God. Like that was really tough. So I'm going to digress, but it was a tough game to watch. But my wife and I were trying to have a conversation during this football game, and neither one of us were like 100% in it. So what we just kind of like looked at each other and laughed and said, do we either want to turn this off, or do we want to just save this conversation for when the football game's done? And we both agreed, like, let's just save it to the football game's almost done. Let's just save it for when we're done. But we both knew that we weren't fully entrenched in the conversation, which was creating a bit of a divide in our conversation. So minimizing distractions is key, whether it's your cell phone, whether it's the TV, even kids. If you want to have a deep, meaningful conversation, it's really hard to do that when you have a screaming 6-year-old in the background, or a 2-year-old, or right, you got teenagers that need or want your attention. So minimizing these distractions during really in-depth conversations is huge. So 3 big ideas here, right? And again, I'm going to give you guys a little bit more nuggets here, a little bit more meat on the bone. When it comes to giving our full attention, like I said, we want to eliminate distractions, number one, but we also want to maintain eye contact, right? Many of us, especially if we've gotten used to a certain relationship, we don't necessarily give the person the best eye contact anymore. And that's really unfortunate. We want to make sure that she feels heard, that she feels seen. And if we can do that with our ears and our eyes and maintain eye contact, she's going to feel those 2 things. Here's the really cool thing about being seen and heard. Once she feels seen and heard, that third need of feeling safe actually kind of falls like a domino. Because if those first 2 needs are being met, the good news is she is going to feel safe. And if she feels safe, that's when intimacy will really start to deepen. That's when things start to feel really, really good. So keep that in mind. Now, to demonstrate empathy, I'm going to take a sip of my coffee here. To demonstrate empathy, what you want to do is, number one, reflective listening, right? You can repeat back in your own words what you heard her say, right? Now, I don't particularly like this. I don't like the statement as what I heard you say is, right? Or we don't want to do that. What we want to do is saying, like, feels like this might be overwhelming right now. And why wouldn't it be? So what I did there is not only did I do some reflective listening, but I also, this is the second point, which is validate her feelings. If I can validate what it is that she's feeling, whether that's sadness or whether that's irritation, frustration, or whatever it is, well, guess what? Women are emotional beings. If I can validate her feelings with what I think she might be feeling, she is going to feel incredibly connected to me because I saw her, I heard her. And by doing so, I'm going to make her feel safe. So demonstrating empathy, reflecting back what it is that you think she is saying with the feeling that you think she might be feeling, that is a recipe for absolute connection, for intimacy, to make her feel safe. This is where really good conversations start to happen. And then the third one is open-ended questions, right? Getting very curious. I'm even going to write this word down so you guys can see it. Getting very, very curious, right? Think of your first date when you asked your wife about her childhood, about maybe what her faith is or what she wants to do for a living or how many kids does she want or what her upbringing was like. You hung on every single word that she says because you were so curious. You were so into her. Well, over time, we feel that that starts to kind of go away. Well, guess what? It doesn't have to go away because we are human beings that evolve, we grow, we change all the time. The person that she was and the things that were important to her and different things. Some might be the same, but some might have changed. Like I said, I've known Jessica for 28 years. It's crazy to think that I've known her that long. And neither one of us are the same people that we used to be. In fact, if I was the same guy at 48 years old that I was at 21, we have a serious problem on our hands, right? We grow, we evolve, things change, we value things differently. So people are always changing, and that's okay to get really curious about that. So ask open-ended questions, encourage further expression. And then two, when she's answering, avoid interrupting. Don't interrupt, right? But further expression means, hey, demonstrate your interest and encourage your wife to share her thoughts, her feelings, and experiences more fully. And there's three words that can really do that. So if you ask your wife, hey, tell me something that was a highlight of your day today. And if she shares something like, oh my gosh, I got a phone call from Jill today. I have not talked to her in so long. Like, it was so good to catch up with her. I was like, man, that's awesome. You must feel amazing. So what I'm doing there is I'm validating her feelings of amazing. Tell me more about that. What'd you guys catch up on? So when I say tell me more about that, it shows my interest, right? It shows that I want her to fully express what happened. Because when she does that, we feel connected and we feel close. So here's what I encourage you guys to do. We went over several different things, but in the alliance, what we do is we have men actually journal on questions, right? And I want you to just think about these, right? Just think about these. If you're listening to this, you're outside of our community, but think about these, because what we can do is when we ask ourselves better questions, we can actually grab the gold that is already there where we've already been successful. So, like for instance, or present day, right? Like this question: besides eye contact and eliminating distractions, what are some additional ways you can ensure she knows and you know that you are fully present and immersed in the conversation, right? Now, we used to do this early on, right? So, like for instance, if I was answering this question, I would think of several different things. I would think back to like maybe our first date, right? Or I would think of times where we were having conversations that were really meaningful. The times where we had meaningful conversations, I would actually physically lean towards her, right? I would lean towards her because that shows that I am interested. I would make sure that I maintained eye contact, right? I would also match her energy. If she was sharing something that was exciting to her, then I would somewhat match that energy with maybe a smile or maybe something like, "Man, that sounds so awesome. Tell me more about that," right? And that's another breadcrumb right there, is tell me more about that means I'm curious about you. I want you to go on. I want you to share more, because when we are interested, we are interesting. And that's actually a quote from Chris Voss, the former chief hostage negotiator for the FBI. When we are interested, we suddenly become more interesting. When we're fully engaged in somebody else's detail, their life, and all the things around that, suddenly we become the most interesting person that she wants to talk to. So that's how you know. Now think about this question as well. How can you effectively validate her feelings? Now there's all kinds of different wisdom that would come forth if we were asking this to a different group of people. Different guys are going to go about this differently. But I'm asking you just to reflect on that question. How can you effectively validate her feelings? And maybe for you, after just learning this particular video and this session, maybe what you've learned is like, man, I really need to insert whatever feeling that I think she's feeling. If I get the feeling that she's feeling frustrated, well, I'm going to say that out loud. Oh my gosh, that sounds so frustrating. Tell me more about that. And again, now what I'm doing is I'm validating feelings, but I'm also getting very curious, right? Curious, tell me more about that. Notice when I say, tell me more about that, I don't say, why do you feel that way? When I use the word why, we want to stay away from that. Anytime you want to use the word why with your wife, with your kids, or people in general, say the words, tell me more about that instead. Tell me more about that is an invite. The word why, believe it or not, psychologically, it puts people on the defense. So stay away from why at all costs. If you're using the word why, replace it with tell me more or tell me more about that, right? Because we want to keep people on the offense. We want to keep them connected to us. And we're not going to do that by triggering small defenses like, why do you feel that way? And especially in that voice tone, too. Use a voice tone of curiosity. Tell me more about that. That sounds really frustrating. Tell me more about that. Right? Versus like, why do you feel that way? When we do that, shows curiosity. We want them to go on. We're validating feelings and we're keeping them on the offense. The third and final question is this: when it comes to connection, intimacy, and the chemistry of the conversation, how can open ended generative questions play a critical role in your intimacy? Now, think about this for a moment. When was the last time that you asked your wife a really in depth question that created more intimacy like that one, right? So if we were to, and when I say like that one, I'll give you an example of one. So if I were to ask my wife, think of a time where you felt incredibly connected to me. We were having the best conversations. You felt like we were totally in love. The sex was amazing, and we felt aligned on our parenting style. What was I doing? What were you doing? And what were we doing together? Now, when I ask that question, that's a lot different than how was your day? What's for dinner? What do the kids do? What do we do? What are the kids' activities this weekend? What do we have going on? Like all these things that don't move the needle. But when I ask my wife that question, think of a time where you felt incredibly connected to me, where all the stars were aligned. You felt like we were in love. We were having great sex. We were having great conversations, and even our parenting styles were aligned. What I'm doing is I'm triggering a memory in her mind of when these good things were happening. And the cool thing about asking open-ended generative questions like this is we can actually grab success that we've had in the past. We don't have to reinvent it. We can actually just do some of the things that we used to do really, really well that maybe came naturally to us or that we were just in the habit of doing. And maybe we've gotten away from that. And she might sit here and be like, man, that's a really good question. And now she's starting to think, and she's starting to think about the past things that you guys have done where you're most connected. And here's the really cool thing about open-ended generative questions. We call them generative questions because they generate emotion. They generate memories, or they generate visions and images and all these really cool things. So when you're asking her that question, she's actually thinking about that time, and she's not just thinking about it, she's actually reliving it. She's actually reliving it. And then she'll probably do this. She'll be like, oh man, that's a really good question. And she'll probably like look up and to the right because that's when people are really thinking. And then she's imagining like, oh my gosh, like I remember this part in our marriage where um the kids were maybe a little bit smaller, but we were going out on more date nights, and we were having conversations that didn't necessarily have to do with us as parents. It had to do with us as individuals and about our marriage. And it just made me feel really, really close to you. And I started thinking, we even start to have more conversations about the exciting things that we could do, that year, or maybe some of the adventures that we were going on, or even some of the small things that we could do. And it just created so much excitement and such a cool bond between you and I. Now, what's to say that you can't be like, man, that's absolutely true. And I remember that too. Let's continue to do that, or let's do that again, right? And let's start right now. And then you could literally just grab some of the amazing information that you've done in the past. You don't have to reinvent a thing. You can actually crowdsource from the past and then just reignite those back into your relationship. So that's the power of generative questions. I'm going to screen share my, again, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm going to screen share my video here one more time. Number one, I'm going to give you guys challenges here to think about. Now that we've talked about certain things you can do, I have a list of 3 optional challenges. And if you're just listening to this as a podcast, I'm going to read them off to you. And if you're watching this on YouTube, maybe take a screenshot of these if you want. But here's challenge number 1, tech-free talk. Okay, that's challenge number 1. Engage in a meaningful conversation without any electronic distractions. That means your phone, that means the TV. And I would also say, like, if you really want to dial this in, don't have a talk around your kids. So a tech-free, kid-free talk maybe might be even better. But choose a specific time to have a conversation with her. Put the phone away, all the other electronic devices. Maybe send the kids downstairs to play a little bit of video games so you guys can have a really cool conversation that's meaningful without all the distractions. When we have a conversation without distractions, it can go deeper. It can be better. The other challenge I call mirror, mirror. Now, this is where I'm practicing 2 things, reflective listening and empathy. Now, remember, reflective listening is I'm sharing with her things that I've heard, and I don't do it. It'd be like, if I heard you right, I'm hearing you say, we want to keep away from those phrases. What we want to say is, man, that sounds incredibly frustrating. I can't even believe you had to go through that. Tell me more about that. Now, what I'm doing is I'm reflecting back an emotion that she's probably feeling, and I'm inviting her in to tell me more. So again, mirror, mirror is a cool challenge. And then the last one here, which is quite frankly my favorite, the open-ended quest. Now, this is using open-ended questions to encourage more depth in the conversation. In your interactions with her, consciously incorporate open-ended questions to elicit more detailed responses. Instead of asking her questions that can be answered with yes, no, frame questions to encourage her to share thoughts and experiences and even feelings, right? So instead of saying, did you have a good day? Try asking, what was the best part of your day? You can also ask, now, if you're on YouTube, you can see all these incredible questions that I have. If not, head on over to thedadedge.com/25 questions. You'll get a free PDF download of this and some additional free training on what generative questions are all about. So, what's a time where you felt most loved by me, and what made you choose that moment? That's what we call the best of the past, right? Because what you're doing is it's a credible generative question that she is going to be thinking about and she's going to be reliving, right? Now, here's a question that is best of the present, because generative questions are the best of the past, the best of the present, and the best of the future, what could be, right? A good question for the present is, when you feel most loved and supported by me, what are some things that I am saying or doing? Now that's best of the present, right? So we can do that. And here's one for the future, right? What is a new routine we could create together, right? Or what is something you would like to do more of in your life? Now, this is something that's more future based, right? But this is what generative questions is all about. And if you're doing your reflective listening and you're doing these things without distractions, it's amazing at the connection. It's amazing what could happen. Now, let me share one more thing before I let you out of here, because I don't want you to necessarily be unprepared. I'm going to take another sip of my coffee here. I don't want you to be unprepared for this, because it will happen. So, and this has happened several times in different marriage masterminds that I teach, which I teach a marriage mastermind myself. I've also had I have one-on-one clients that I help them with their marriage. But when I teach them these points around conversational excellence and how to spark a conversation, I always warn men, because I don't want you to be hit blindly by this. If you're going to listen to any part of this particular podcast, I really want this particular point to sink in. Once you start doing this, I'm going to warn you, right? So if you go up to your wife and maybe you guys haven't been close for quite some time, or maybe you're just kind of like operating or existing or settling or coexisting, and you go up to her and say, what is something I currently do that makes you feel most loved? There's a good chance, depending on the dynamics of your relationship, that she's going to look at you like you have 2 heads. Like, why are you asking me this? You never ask me these questions, right? Or she might be like, why are you asking me this? What's wrong? Right? Or like, it's a really random question. She might like give you like the one eyebrow that's kind of up, like, why are you asking me this? So let me explain psychologically what's going on for your wife. If she has a response like that, she's telling you a couple different things. Number one, you haven't asked me a question like this in quite some time, and I'm not sure why you're doing it. What's your agenda here? So she might get kind of suspect, right? Or what's actually happening is human beings have a need for certainty. There's 6 basic human needs: certainty, variety, love, community, growth, and contribution. So if she says, why are you asking me this? Or she's giving you kind of like the side eye, what you're actually messing with her is that need for certainty. So even though like the relationship, let's just say there's not a whole lot of depth in your marriage right now. Well, she's gotten quite used to that. And she's certain of that now. So as soon as we start to peel back the onion layers again and we start to actually try to get close again, that messes with her need for certainty. She's like, wait a second. We're going into uncertain conversations here, conversations we haven't had in a while. And I'm not exactly sure how they're going to turn out. And I don't know why you're asking me these. So that messes with her psyche, right? It's no different than if your grandmother, I want you to picture your grandmother, whether she's alive or she's not with us anymore. I want you to just picture your grandmother for a second, just sweet little old grandmother. And she comes up to you and she's like, hey, Larry, guess what? I'm going to run a marathon and I start training tomorrow. And maybe poor woman can maybe barely walk up and down the stairs, but she's going to go train for a marathon. We would think that grandma has lost her mind, right? We wouldn't be like, grandma, that's so awesome. I'm so proud. That's amazing. We'd be like, grandma, are you okay? Like, what's wrong? Is everything okay? Well, that's the same thing that's happening for our wives when we do something different. They're like, well, what's wrong? Why are you doing this? Why is this happening? So, just know that. Now, if she responds in that way, here's what you do. Here's what you do. You simply say, I know I haven't asked you questions like this in a long time. I know that. And maybe it's because I just haven't really taken the time, or I lost the focus of why conversations like this are important. And you know what? That's on me. But at the same time, I would still really like to continually get to know you over and over and over again. So with that being said, what is something that I currently do that makes you feel most loved? Or whatever the question was. Doesn't matter what it is. Just repeat it. So your first step is to own it. Second step is to repeat it. By owning it and saying it out loud, that's going to make her feel safe. People feel safe around people who are very self-aware. Okay. People feel safer around people who are self-aware. I want you to think about Michael Scott for a second from The Office, right? His employees don't give him any credibility. They don't give him any respect. And they sure don't, quote unquote, feel safe around him because they know he's a loose cannon. They know like whatever he's saying, it's just off the whim. And they're like, okay, here's Michael Scott being Michael Scott again. Jeez. And they had no credibility whatsoever. So when we're self-aware, like I want you to think about this. If Michael Scott were to go into a meeting and be like, hey guys, like, look, I've really done some deep work here lately, and I know I come across as a complete moron. And I know it probably doesn't even look like I know what I'm doing. And you probably are even thinking like, maybe I'm not even qualified to do this job. Well, I realize that. And that's a huge miss on my part. And that's why I've decided to take some leadership training. I'm learning some leadership training. I'm going to be different around here. And I'm going to operate quite a bit different. And you know what? All the past is on me. I think it's safe to say that the staff, and I'm sitting here thinking about like Jim and Dwight and Pam, and they still might be like, what? But at the same time, you get where I'm saying. Like when people are more self-aware and they say things like this out loud and they're willing to make a change and do something different, well, we can buy in a little bit more because that person, not only is that person reflecting back what the type of person they're going to be, but they're also very self-aware that they haven't been that person for a while. So again, this is what we teach all day, every day. And we have 3 more weeks of this content in the Alliance. So we're going to not only help men with deeper conversations, we're going to help them take action in several different areas of their marriage this month in February. There's even going to be an entire week dedicated to giving her and you parameters around having a deep conversation. We call it the appreciative interview. It's insanely fun. It's insanely fun, but it's a way that we can really, really dial in this connection. We're going to be talking about passion. We're going to be talking about sex. We're going to be talking about elevating intimacy, the whole 9 yards, the recipe to make your marriage better. That's what we're going to be doing here in the month of February. And like I said, you can join us anytime in February. You'll still get all the amazing content. Also, even if this is past February, like I said, we have 4 or 5 different. By the time you listen to this, we'll have 5 marriage calls per week in the Dad Edge Alliance. So you can dive in anytime, no matter what we're teaching. We have call teams dedicated specifically for this. Gentlemen, I hope this video training really helped you. If you're watching me on YouTube, if you're listening to this on audio, hopefully you got the gems out of it. But this is what our relationships are all about. We don't want to go in winging them. We don't want to go in trying to make them work and just following some sort of blind blueprint. There is a recipe for success. There is a recipe to make things better. And that recipe starts with us learning skills. No different than martial arts, no different than being a civil engineer or a surgeon or an electrician or a carpenter or whatever. We learn these skills, we implement, and that's what makes us better. Hopefully this was helpful. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your week. Love you. Love you. All right. And love that wife of yours. Take care.